inspiration, creativity, smarts that Lee has exhibited here. And it's quite a promotion because, as everybody knows, it's the equivalent of being promoted to general officer rank in the uniform side. And so Lee will be an SES senior, part of the board of directors, clearly an executive as a decision maker. And the service is truly what he represents in all that he has done. So I want to congratulate him for that. I'd also glad to have Kathy here because I'm going to go discuss a little bit about Lee's background because I think it will highlight why he's being promoted today with the experience that he's got. But the other part that should come across very clearly is that while he wears civilian clothes and I wear a uniform, he tries to compete with me on a number of moves. And with that, clearly recognition of Kathy and all that she has done, making the life right as they've traveled around and supported the family. And like the rest of us, some of the timing of this ceremony relative to when the actual event occurred has provided a little bit of time, but at least the message came while they were off in England, so the money started to be spent at the appropriate time. And hopefully Katrina's had her allowance doubled. But I want to talk about some of Lee's background because promotion is really not based on what you have done, but it is based upon people's view of your potential to do things in the future. But we get that view and insight based upon performance. And so I want to go back to where Lee started his career, which was back in 1967 in Frankfurt. And as Lee and I were talking right before we walked down here, that was an interesting time to be in the personnel business in Frankfurt because it was where the CPO had been off the Abrams compound. He was talking about his job of when they would have the riots because of Vietnam and throw the bricks through the window. His job was to put down the steel grating and put the chains around the front door. So that's a way to start. Went from Frankfurt to Fort Huachuca in the intern program. Was back in Stuttgart at UConn. Went back to Fort Ord, Fort Lewis. Then I gather that maybe by having been in UConn, he thought he'd want to be more joint. So worked for the Navy in D.C. as the Deputy Director, IG of Naval Civilian Personnel. And then really wanted to get broadened out and moved to Denver with the Department of the Interior, where he was the Director of Management for Engineering and the Research Center, and then Director of their Financial Computer and Admin Services Center. And then back in '89, came back to the Army, at the Department of the Army, in the Army Civilian Personnel Modernization Office in Des Peres, and worked on some very key issues. Improving how the Army manages its civilian workforce. I'm glad you did that, because we gave him an opportunity shortly after that. And it was a key developer in some programs. One, managing civilians to budget, and then the establishment of the Army Acquisition Corps. Based on that, came here in July of '90. Most of you know what we've been doing since July of '90. We joked that we have a large group of friends inside the room. Outside
West, Secretary of the Army.
You can tell Kathy doesn't want to be associated with my office. She moved about as far away as she could. Well, I'd like to just thank General Maddox, General Schroeder, General Hagan, General Sikora for the trust and confidence that they have in selecting me for the position and giving me the opportunity to continue to be a part of something very significant. I'd also like to thank all of the civilian personnel division chiefs that I see here, because it's really their good work that makes me look good. It causes you to think I should be promoted. The other people in the room that have taken time out from their schedules to come by this morning, especially the commanders. Without guys like Nick and Rich, General Maddox obviously doesn't have much need for somebody like me. So I really appreciate the commanders taking time to come. Mostly I appreciate Kathy. She's responsible for everything good that happens to me. And she's responsible for everything that I do that's good. She's not responsible for the rest, but she gets close. With that, again, thank you for taking the time to come. Thank you very much, sir, for the opportunity and privilege to serve in command.
Can you back up a little bit here?
Is that
There
a
you
video
go.
camera?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Hi.
Go ahead and take it. You want me to? Let me get that. How about if I get that? What was it?
I don't know. I mean, I'm going to have to charge him up again, I
I
guess.
think so. All I did was flicker, flicker, flicker.
Hey, you want
I was
tell you what,
making you really
I'll
mad.
take a picture of it. You get in there. That's all right. I can take a picture of you sitting there. And then I'll go shake hands with him.
Well, that's too long a line. I'll wait till the end. Let's take it before, and then I will do it. What do you suppose happened to the battery?
I don't know.
You suppose it was in the longer transport?
Might have been.
You know what we should have done is discharge him yesterday and ran him back up.
That's what we should,
I didn't
yeah.
get a single thing done.
Payment in kind.
Oh, you come up.
I'm trying to pull up the deal where I make an agreement with well, I'm a stand deal. They say yes, and I'll
Oh, champagne? Oh, no. You mean she's still This is fun.
Boy, I'll tell you, I flew back in Delta flight. They had people hanging on the wing.
Really?
It was really quite a flight to make it.
Is that, do you think? I don't.
Well, excuse me. You go shake his hand. Let me do it,
Okay.
honey, before he disappears.
Okay.
I didn't get you shaking. I didn't get you shaking hands.
Oh, you did?
You didn't give me time to get focused in. I feel so badly about that battery, Don.
I saw it. I saw it blinking. So
I never
took
had it do anything like that before. They were both charged up, but
Yeah, I saw it blinking.
what do you think it was? Since you'd never seen it do that before either.
I don't know. Yeah,
Go ahead,
oh,
honey.
no, go ahead.
Just get some of the group for them.
Got real food.
Hope I didn't get in your way.
Put that away so I can introduce you to my boss.
This has to come in a little bit. There we go. Well, it takes a moment when you use the fader to come in on it. This isn't real fast when you're fading in. I thought that was a very nice compliment, General Sikora paid Lee.
Oh, yes.
Very special person. And I said, I know.
Yes. Oh, yeah, I think so. That was kind of nice of Lee and Kathy to invite us over for, an introduction.
I think so.
Yeah. Yeah, it must be just general offices with the, see right over there, the kind of bald-headed fellow is 3-star, over to the left.
Okay, I'll swing on around him if I'm taking. I can catch him. Get that gentleman. Just a good shot.
Best ones if you can get him without him seeing it.
Thought I'd try to get these flags.
Oh, yeah.
It's a nice ceremony.
That was
I'm
really.
just so sorry about the battery.
That's all right. We got most of it.
Well, the other gentleman, Jim,
And the mail is good. The mail is good. My mail's going everywhere. You can't imagine where my mail is going.
well, there's Jim, their friend Jim. I don't see Judy. Can you find her and I'll try to get her?
Judy's right next to Lee.
Oh, best angle. Ooh, there's a familiar face. Don.
I was telling you that when they said that we started out with the riots and the great stuff, maybe that's going to be his last job. The great, it'll start them the same way.
Two giggling friends. That's what I wanted. Thank you.
Jim wasn't sure.
I'm very disgusted with one portion of it. We double-checked, quadruple-checked our batteries, and when Lee was doing his speech, we've never had it happen before. The battery started flickering, so.
It'll be okay. Because it flickers for just a few minutes. It'll be all right.
You
should be
think so?
okay. Yeah.
Well, I know the other gentleman, Jim and Judy, that came with him, he took some, so don't go away, young lady, because I'd like to get you. Always embarrassing. I wasn't, it took a moment, Susan, so give me just a second, okay?
Am I turning bright red? I should be turning bright
No.
red.
Anyhow, Seeger's from Holland, and he's a graphic illustrator. In fact, I guess he's one of the best when he's at the school. But the first thing he mentioned was Michael Williams. First thing he mentioned was Dan Frank's album.
That's because it's the most interesting.
Then the second one was the Van Gogh.
Yeah, Picasso. Yeah, that's true. That's right around the
Because
corner.
he's an artist himself.
Yeah.
You know, I mean,
Well, it's also interesting.
Yeah.
It really is. It's super. But you're like just walking through the streets is beautiful, and the flower thing. And if they have any of the little tours outside the city, try to get on them. You know, the little bus tours because they take you to The windmills.
Oh, yeah.
The windmills,
I
and
will.
they have a wooden shoe. You can do the little tours to watch them build wooden, make wooden shoes, and the Delft factory. I mean, there's so much to do
Can
there.
you do that right from the tourist that BBB right there by the train station?
That was mine. When I went with a college tour, and it was a long time ago, and everything was set up. So I am sure you can do that once you're in the town.
You're getting some out of Hanau and some out of Frankfurt. Now, and then we offered you everything you got in line. See, that's not July, is not all. Yeah, that's what it says. There's two in our CPO. Go out and walk. John said he was told that you didn't want to. Oh, yeah. Who's handling your? Oh, just something. No, not this time. We have to. We left. So we're gonna turn them in.
They're not going where they You should know.
Had you ever seen the ad? Had you ever seen the
So at Christmas time, they determined that my husband should do a kind of Merry Christmas to me. So the first thing they came up with is, let's do it downtown. Well, the fest is on time. So she got herself all running
You
about
take a little
5
time.
seconds, 30 seconds.
I just saw you on TV.
You want to identify, you got to figure out how to way back.
Yeah, an hour.
Yeah, I know. It's like they're up there smoking, and it's like, oh.
General, like terrorists.
Wow, yeah.
All right. I remember the cocktail way back. By this up there. Oh, those guys were smoking cigarettes up there.
We'll see you up early.
Okay.
Congratulations. My mistake not to go to work.
Have fun today.
Where's Redhead?
She wanted to be here.
I was gonna think, she won't run and stop.
But she is a son, or just started skiing.
Oh, yeah, she'll have to get to the high slopes.
Oh, she's like a rat going
She'll
up
be
and
a
down.
glacier skier, yeah. Yeah, I remember, we watched.
She breaks away from us now and then.
Should take a little bit of
She'll ski down the other side.
Are you getting lots of pictures, you think?
Yes, except we had one. I had one mishap, and Don and I neither one have ever had it happen before. Oh.
The lighting doesn't look real good in here. That's super. And then
But you know, parents, you know, him to.
you can take them.
The reason that we got a new one.
No, your white light came on.
See, I gotta be in the right place for the light.
Well, this is the same thing, kind of bounces off, but, and I'm not used to this. This is my daughter's. But I figure something is better than nothing.
Effect on the civilian workforce in USERA, which has been cut by 50% since 1990. 6,000 positions still need to be cut, but USERA's commander, General David Maddox, says about half of those who are cut will get new jobs. Gary Bottell reports.
How about you?
It's been a turbulent time for U.S. and foreign national civilian employees of the U.S. Army Europe. Since 1990, the theater workforce has gone from more than 100,000 to less than 50,000 employees. By October of 1995, it will be at 40,000. The theater workforce can be divided into two main categories. Those employees working directly for USERA. 65,000 people worked for USERA in 1990. That figure is down to 31,000 now and will bottom out at 25,000 in October of next year. There were 36,000 people working in organizations supporting USERA, such as the commissaries and schools, in 1990. By October 1995, that figure will be down to 15,000. Lee Goki, the Assistant Deputy Chief of Staff Personnel, says now that the end is in sight, USERA can concentrate on retraining and relocating employees whose positions are being eliminated. But the civilian workforce reduction has presented USERA and General David Maddox with some real challenges.
The mere loss of 1 out of every 2 employees, or slightly more than that, is a problem unto itself and a challenge. More importantly has been the political influence on the way that the General has been able to command USERA. The decision on what our in-strength soldiers and the composition was have, of course, been very political, and they've constantly changed. And in reaction to that, we have had to put 3 completely different organizational structures in place in the theater, meaning that almost every organization out there has either had some change in its mission or some change in its geography, or certainly a change in its composition.
Lee Goki added that most of the people still working for USERA after the drawdown are in different jobs today, and USERA has had a tremendous retraining and reorganization task. Gary Bottell, AFN News.
In the second part of our series on USERA jobs, AFN's Gary Bottell looks at their program of retraining and relocating those members of the workforce whose positions are being eliminated as the end of the drawdown approaches. Another quality of life concern is the issue of education. Although USERA has turned the corner on the civilian reduction in force, 6,000 additional jobs will be cut by October of next year. Sync USERA General David Maddox is hoping to balance the needs of the civilian workforce with his obligations to the military and their families. Lee Goki, the Assistant Deputy Chief of Staff of Personnel, says the Sync has ordered a series of measures which may keep about half of those 6,000 in the workforce.
When General Maddox looks into the command, and we do a variety of modeling that lets him get the kind of vision of the command that he wants, and when he looks into that, what he sees is that by and large, we have the skills that we need to deliver our in-state responsibilities, but we don't necessarily have those skills in the right location. What the retraining and the relocation initiative is that he announced here in the last couple of weeks is an opportunity to, one, recognize that if we provide some enhanced skill training, some refresher skill training to employees, particularly our foreign national employees, but our American employees as well, and if we can provide a financial benefit that will keep them from suffering a penalty for relocating, that we probably have a good opportunity to meet most of our in-state skill requirements from our existing employees who otherwise would become unemployed.
Tomorrow, Lee Goki talks about the thaw and the hiring freeze, who is affected, and what it means to the job market. Use for a single... This week we've been taking a look. For the past 4 years, there has been a freeze on civilian hiring throughout most of USERA to bring about the reduction in force. In Part 3 of our series on USERA jobs, we learned that a thaw has set in. Gary Bottel reports.
When the drawdown began, USERA imposed hiring restrictions more severe than anywhere in the Department of the Army. There was a total freeze on local national hiring, because this was the area where most of the jobs would be cut. There were restrictions on U.S. hiring as USERA looked into reutilizing those employees already in the system. New positions which did open up were filled with temporary hires or family members. After 4 years, the theater force of more than 100,000 employees was cut in half. Most of the reduction came through attrition as workers retired or moved on. 20% was accomplished through voluntary retirement programs or the expiration of contracts. Now, Sync USERA General David Maddox has lifted the hiring freeze in 3 areas.
What we found in Bad Kreuznach, in Würzburg, and in part in Hanau, when General Maddox reviewed all the information that he had down into the organization, is that basically those organizations met all 3 criteria. They were well within their payroll. They were almost at their end strength for the fiscal year already, even though we're only halfway through it. And they had really balanced all the skills that they could, and they didn't have anything hanging out there in large pockets like Wildflecken, where we have a total closure that they still had to come to grips with. If we didn't lift the hiring restrictions on them, we would basically drive vacancies that would detract from the quality of life standards that the General is committed to and that he spoke to. Our objective there, though, I need to stress, is not to go out necessarily and hire new people out of the labor market, but again, to use the lifting of the hiring restrictions to get as much cross-placement as we can within the command in concert with relocation and retraining, U.S. and LN, so that we really can just redistribute the workforce that we have.
Lee Goki also says the employment situation is now stabilizing, and employees in the in-state job structure can be confident about the future. Gary Bottel, AFN News.
Many military members are concerned about how the draw... Since it began, Air Force... The Army drawdown to a smaller and more effective force is also changing the way civilian personnel does business. Lee Goki, the USERA CPO chief, says the Army is trying to design a more flexible workforce and the rules to go with it. He says right now the system is too locked into bureaucratic process.
Our biggest complaint from our customers, be they managers or employees or job applicants, is that the system's too complicated. And because it's complicated, it's extremely bureaucratic. That's aggravated by the fact that to deal with that complexity, we put our administrative people on the front counter and we put our specialists in the back room, and we put them to working the process to make sure that we don't do things that are contrary to law or to the rules. What we're trying to do with this reorganization is to move all that process to a central organization, which would be in Mannheim, Germany, and put all of our specialists out on the ground where the employees are, not in large regional personnel offices, but at base support battalions, where the employees and the managers actually exist. The bottom line is that when a customer walks into that local office, they will first and foremost be meeting the best specialists that we have in the command, and they'll be meeting them in a way where that employee's entire focus is on dealing with them and their needs, because there's somebody else in a central organization dealing with the process issue.
Tomorrow, Lee Goki talks about the often misunderstood role of family members in the workforce. The Army's Medical Command in This week, we've been looking at the USERA employment situation. The USERA CPO Chief Lee Goki says by end state, family members will make up 1/4 of the workforce. But he says there are some misconceptions as to what kind of jobs those are.
Contrary to the view of a lot of people who think that family members occupy secondary jobs, if you will, not primary jobs, they are in fact the backbone of our professional workforce. They populate our hospitals and our medical facilities. You'll find them in our budget offices, our personnel offices, not as clerks. There'll be some there that way, but as specialists, as budget analysts, as personnel specialists. In essence, we have an enormous career workforce that we just happen to call family members because we have some appointment categories that attach that label to them. But they are the backbone of our career U.S. workforce. They are now. They will be in the future. 10,000 jobs is still an enormous number of jobs, not as many as before the drawdown, but then none of the categories are as many as they were before. We will always look to the family members as a key part of the workforce.
The CPO Chief for USERA, Lee Goki. Well, one area of civilian employment
The new system divides the responsibilities the traditional CPO has in order to improve service to the customer and increase workforce planning and production.
What this concept really does is it recognizes that all three of those functions have to succeed equally well to have a human resource management program, that they can't be traded off. And so we discreetly separate them, and we assign them to organizations where that function is in fact the priority mission of the organization. So we get the synergy of all three instead of the competition and the resulting loss of the three being working against one another.
Under the new structure, service centers dealing directly with employees will be set up throughout USERA. They will be connected in a computer network to the operations center near Mannheim. The service centers will deal directly with local management on staffing issues or training needs, for example. It will do all of the processing and counseling that employees need, and it will offer information services such as a job information center. The operations center will handle the production workload, such as processing personnel actions. All personnel files will be stored here, and it would be linked by computer to all the service centers. This centralization allows more personnel specialists to be at the service centers.
Right now, less than 10% of our theater resources for civilian personnel management are out on site where the employees are. Most of them are in these large regional personnel offices, which were excellent for drawdown and for terminating employees, but aren't excellent for the kind of caring that we want to transition into. Under this concept, because we take that 70% production workload and put it in one location, we reduce it tremendously. And we take the specialists out of it, which means we can put them back in the service center. Under the new concept, over 50% of the command's civilian personnel resources will be out on site where the employee is, as opposed to 10%. And more importantly, the 50% will be 75% specialists.
Lee Goki added that customers will also have computer access to the service centers through the Defense Data Network, so they don't actually need to go to the center to get assistance. Gary Bautel, AFN News.
USERA personnel officials say the reorganization of the personnel delivery system role drawdown creates for civilian employees. The Deputy Chief of Staff for Personnel, Major General Thomas Sikora, describes it as a critical role.
We as an Army cannot function without a capable and effective trained civilian workforce. And just because the Army is getting smaller doesn't change those parameters one bit. The civilian workforce will also get smaller, of course, but their essentiality on a percentage basis will increase. Remember, civilians are very special people who are doing very special jobs for us in the military, and we cannot function without them. These are the folks that are doing our weapons systems technicians kinds of things. They are our MWR specialists, our safety specialists, jobs that the military doesn't do for themselves within our green suiters. So it means, yeah, the force is going to get a little smaller. It means, yeah, things are changing, but it also means that the role of the civilian and the role that they play on behalf of our Army will be increasing in its importance.
General Sikora added that under the new structure, civilians will be needed in contingency cases more than ever before. Tomorrow, we will have a report on what the customer can expect from the new personnel centers. For almost 40 years, Heraklion Air Station on the island of Crete, Rwanda, killing tens of thousands of people and uprooting hundreds of thousands from their homes. In an interview with AFN, the U.S. Ambassador to Rwanda, David Rawson, outlines the United States' role in resolving the crisis.
The first thing that will confront us as Americans is a tremendous humanitarian need resulting from this tragic conflict. It is one of the most highly populated countries in the world. Any kind of conflict there generates refugees, displaced persons, hunger, malnutrition, and we're going to have a humanitarian crisis to respond to, I think, very soon. So that will be the first step. Hopefully we can eventually convince the sides to get around a table and to put whatever pieces are left together again. People cannot live in war. They have to live together in peace, and they've got to find that peace somehow, and we'll certainly be there helping them to try to do that.
Ambassador Rawson believes the world community will have to respond to Rwanda's humanitarian crisis by first helping Rwandan refugees in neighboring countries. The CARE Aid Agency says about 26,000 Rwandans have fled to Zaire, Tanzania, Uganda, and Burundi, while hundreds of thousands are displaced. Going through some major changes soon, including the setting up of service centers dedicated strictly to taking care of the customer. Gary Bottel reports.
On the 15th of May, the new service centers will open in Heidelberg, Mannheim, Karlsruhe, Kaiserslautern, and Worms. And near Mannheim, an operations center will open to handle all the production work, filing, and so on, to free up personnel specialists to work in the new service centers. Every 45 days, another major unit will come online so that by the end of this year, all 50,000 civilian employees in USERA will have service centers near them, all linked by computer to the central operations center. What can the customer expect when they walk through the door at the service center?
The first thing they can expect is that they'll be met at the front counter by a specialist, by one of the most knowledgeable people, not by a cleric or a technical employee, which, although good, doesn't have the same command of the knowledge. The second thing they can expect is that that specialist is going to be focused solely on their needs and not trying to juggle the attention they give that customer with also doing the planning and also doing the production, most notably the production. They can expect that that specialist will be a total personnel's solution kind of person. So they'll deal with their problem from the beginning to the end. The employee won't have to be handed off to different specialists in the office as the personnel transaction moves from job classification to recruitment to appointment, as an example.
Lee Goki added that at the service centers, the USERA civilian employee or potential employee can also expect easy access to all the information needed to make decisions or start a personnel action. Gary Bottel, AFN News.
Quality, commitment, and better service are all prerequisites in meeting the new quality of life standards set by USERA's Commander-in-Chief, General David Maddox. Facility consolidation is supposed to ease the drawdown transition and at the same time meet those standards. The CIF, or Central Issue Facility in Mannheim, Germany, is now consolidated, serving those stationed in Mannheim and Heidelberg. Is President Clinton's legislation initiative to reorganize the federal bureaucracy, the National Performance Review. Gary Bottel reports.
USERA officials are confident the president's proposals will be enacted. And when that happens, life will become much simpler for people looking for a job and the managers who hire them. Within the federal government now, there are some 270 different job categories. That will be cut by 2/3. The 15 pay structures will be replaced by 4 or 5 pay scale groups. Hiring will be much simpler. Federal employees will either be temporarily or permanently hired. And a mountain of rules and regulations will be done away with. Deputy Assistant Chief of Staff Personnel Lee Goki says the new procedures will enable the manager to make his hiring decisions on his needs rather than the dictates of the bureaucracy.
Employees. We literally have hundreds of ways to hire an employee right now. Under the National Performance Review, we'll have two ways. We'll hire them temporary or we'll hire them permanent. And if we hire them temporary after 3 years, if they're still around, they'll automatically become permanent. And there'll be benefit and compensation packages that are tied to temporary versus permanent employment so that they're both attractive. The real feature that we get out of that is not only taking a tremendous amount of the workload out of the system and just the onerous nature of the civil service structure, but we make it so that employees can understand it, so they don't have to find someone to lead them through the system. And we make it so that managers can make decisions within it, that they don't have to understand all the different ways to hire people. All they have to do is know whether they have a short-term need or a long-term need.
Lee Goki added that the civilian personnel reorganization in USERA, coupled with the National Performance Review, will go a long way toward providing flexibility and versatility in the civilian workforce, critical for the smaller Army of tomorrow. Gary Bautel, AFN News.
And while the civilian personnel delivery system modernizes, USERA leaders are saying the post-drawdown era will challenge the civilian workforce more than ever. Deputy Chief of Staff of Personnel, Major General Thomas Sikora, says the key to this situation is versatility and flexibility, much like the way the Army is preparing for the future.
The Army right now is going through a major change from a training and technological perspectives. Examples of that are the Louisiana Maneuvers effort that we have going on back in the States right now to test how the soldier will act and fight in tomorrow's battlefield. The Chief of Staff of the Army, General Sullivan, is working the Force 21 thing, which is geared towards a vision of what the future ought to look like and how we as a force will act and be structured. Well, all of that takes advantage of technology. It's geared towards the best information about the enemy or about the situation and how to exploit it with a smaller, more lethal force. Well, exactly those same parameters apply to our civilian workforce. We must be smaller. We must be capable of responding to specific and essential operations, but we must exploit technology. All of that says, as an individual, a civilian must be flexible in terms of their capability to respond to requirements and very, very versatile.
Major General Thomas Sikora, the Deputy Chief of Staff of Personnel. Well, the last 5 years, part of that restructuring is the setting up of service centers to take care of personnel issues at the base support battalion level. The Deputy Chief of Staff of Personnel says the time is ripe for the switch.
In the old days, the centralized regional civilian personnel support operation worked very, very well. In today's environment, smaller force, more lethal, greater dependence on technology, it's a dinosaur. It just won't work any longer. So as we began the process of trying to decide how do you restructure the support for our civilians, General Maddox Sink said to me, Tom, what you got to do is you got to put the power in the hands of the base support battalion commander. I mean, that's where the action is. That officer needs to be able to do those things essential to supporting his workforce as well as getting his job done. And that's precisely what we've done in the reorganization. We have given him the capability of a small group of people to perform those services that are essential to the base support battalion community level. And we've withdrawn back here to a large service center in Friedrichsfeld all of the more generic, all the more common kinds of activities that don't need to be done out there in the base support battalion area.
Major General Thomas Sikora, Deputy Chief of Staff for Personnel. Moving stuff from point A to point B, USERA reorganizes its civilian personnel delivery system to better serve the civilian. Army spokesmen say the civilian role in the smaller Army is becoming more important. The Deputy Chief of Staff for Personnel says contingency operations like the Gulf War will require civilian support.
The role of our civilian workforce in support of contingency operations will be ever increasing. Mind you now, as we get smaller with the greater emphasis on technology, on the very special skills and very special kinds of things that our civilians do, we will need to carry those things with us as we get ourselves involved in wherever the contingency happens to be. Now, in the Gulf, we did, in fact, bring civilians over in relatively limited numbers. We could not have functioned without them. A very good example were the morale, welfare kinds of folks who came over. We could not do those things if we didn't have our civilians there to support us. Now, that same thing applies in the future. Again, smaller workforce, greater emphasis on technology, but the demand for our civilians to participate in, or at the very least to support contingency operations, is going to go up significantly, in my opinion. They are very, very critical to our success.
Major General Thomas Sikora, Deputy Chief of Staff for Personnel. Siberia may not be a place where you'd think friendships would bloom. 21st TACOM's Gail McCabe reports that American military spouses took up the challenge and offered a friendly hand to their Russian counterparts.
Colonel Nikolai Petrovich Nabrovkin, the former political officer, advocates the wife-to-wife exchange being introduced by the American women. The colonel admits that there are benefits to be had from American friendship.
Volunteers are the backbone of a military community.
The ladies are the motivators behind Olive Branch International, a humanitarian organization dedicated to fostering international bonds of friendship with military families throughout the world.
And if I can come here with a hand of friendship and encouragement and some of the things I've learned over the years that will prevent my husband and my sons and daughter-in-law who have been in the military and are in the military now, that they don't have to go to war again. I just think that this is so worth it.
The similarities become immediately apparent. U.S. or Russian, military life means extra burdens for the spouse. Irina Evakova is head of the Women's Council and a strong proponent for the American presence. As a colonel's wife and a mother, she's looking for answers to problems faced by the families of the rocket forces.
Я думаю, что вопросы взаимодействия будут для нас очень полезны и очень интересны.
Part of the challenge faced by the American spouses is introducing new concepts into a different culture. More in a future report. In Omsk, Siberia, Gail McCabe, 21st TACOM.
You can catch more about Siberia in Breaking the Ice tomorrow afternoon on UCOM Report. 3 stateside-based bridge building units are in Germany for the annual training exercise called BridgeX. Army Sergeant Tony Covington